We're going to see a movie that Stephen Milton made this past week about a Christmas creche. You'll notice that we have Christmas creches in the back. Some of you brought them in. That's lovely. So this is a social justice clip, and I reflect on it briefly in my message, but very, very well worth seeing. And so let's run it.
A month ago, we were at the US-Mexico border. We saw children and mothers who are fleeing horror, being turned away at the border.
If Mary and Joseph were to have a baby today, and they had been born somewhere in Latin or South America where there's high rates of violence and people fearing for their lives, very easily one of these migrants that we're seeing in the news stories could have been this family.
What I truly believe is if this happened to my family, I think that my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old especially, I don't think they would ever talk again. I don't think they would ever be emotionally functional again.
I went down there and met moms who are facing extraordinary choices this Christmas, fleeing from places that are violent and death-dealing, and finding themselves at a border that is shut hard, and their choices are to go deep into the desert where thousands have died.
We are responsible for this. So Canada holds bilateral agreements with the United States called the Safe Third Country Agreement, which says that any asylum seeker who makes a claim in the United States cannot enter Canada and make a refugee claim because the United States is safe for refugees. And so what that means is that Trump's policies, American immigration policies, are Canadian policies. So we are affirming that we think that what's happening in the United States is safe for refugees, which it clearly isn't.
And some will say you are politicizing Christ. And to those we say Christ has always been political. Christ has always been on the margins. Christ was the one who had to flee, Herod and become a refugee himself. And we forget that part of the Christmas story. We want to keep Christ in the beautiful manger and not travel with him.
So you have heard me say this several times over the past few years, but as a minister who preaches most Sundays, I worry that I have become a nag. I worry that when you come to church, you too often feel imposed upon to be something or to do some things that you cannot or do not want to do. I've always had this problem with thinking of myself as a nag and struggling with whether or not that's a good thing. When I was a young minister, my friend Nick Overdoon and I served congregations that were about 100 kilometers apart. And he was in St. Thomas, I was in Sarnia. And we used to meet monthly halfway for lunch. And we'd take our best sermon along, and we would read them to each other, and then we would sit down at the table and critique each other's sermons. And Nick used to say the same thing over and over about my sermons back then. He said, "John, you are such a nag." See, back then, I was a Christian Reform minister, and like all Christian Reform ministers, I thought, I believed that every type of public institution needed to have a better Christian alternative. So I'd get on the pulpit every week and preach it. And of course, these institutions needed money, so I would preach, support your Christian institutions, support the Christian day schools and the Christian high schools. For example, there's one right up here in Woodbridge, the high school I went to as a kid, Toronto District Christian High. There's another grade school in Willowdale Christian School, and I'd say, send your money there. We had a Christian labor union. It still exists, the Christian Labor Association of Canada. And I would say, send your money to the Christian Labor Association. We had a Christian hospital in Grand Rapids where our patients would sometimes go. I'd say, support Redeemer Christian College in Hamilton. Every week, I demanded more engagement with and more support for all these alternative Christian organizations that we Dutch Calvinist immigrants thought we had to start here in Canada. And Nick warned me. Nick said, John, you sound like a nag and you should stop it. So I thought about that, and I thought maybe Nick is right. So I decided, well, I guess I could preach the Heidelberg Catechism instead. So the Catechism explains, and my sermons explained, substitutionary atonement and the ubiquity of Jesus with respect to the nature of his presence at the Lord's Supper and predestination and the Ordo Salutis and eschatology and many other theological chestnuts. And thus it came to pass in my 8th year of ministry, instead of nagging my congregation, I put them to sleep. Eventually, I figured out that complex theological concepts that interested me didn't actually do that much for my congregants. And in any case, I had come to the view that theology should be played rather than preached. And then years later, I became here a minister at Lawrence Park Community Church. And I had to decide again, once more, what do I preach now? Well, I like retelling the old story sometimes. Unfortunately, when I go through the Bible looking for these stories, I find that many of them are very disturbing, like the whole world being wiped out by a flood, or all the firstborn children in Egypt being killed by an angel, or the people of Israel being sent into exile because they worshipped other gods. And so that didn't seem like a really good idea. So there are stories about Jesus, too, and I thought I could preach those. And many of Jesus' stories are fabulous. But a lot of them, are miracle stories, for example, and I thought to myself, well, how often can you preach a miracle story? It kind of gets tiring to explain that the point of the miracle today isn't whether or not it really happened exactly that way. Well, actually, the point of miracle stories is, Jesus loved the down and out, and then I'm not really sure. So I can tell the old stories, but I'm not really sure to what end. So then I think to myself, well, I could preach social justice. In fact, I should preach social justice. The United Church is really big on social justice, and I like that about the United Church, and it's one of the reasons I came here. And the film we just saw is really a social justice film, right? Stephen Milton made the film, and that creche, that manger scene in front of that church, it juxtaposes sweet little baby Jesus, like the Jesus we have here, sweet little baby Jesus. It juxtaposes that with the inhumane treatment of immigrant children by American authorities. They actually sometimes, not always, but too often, far too often, separate children from parents at the United States-Mexico border. And then those children, while they are being processed, are put in cages, sometimes for days at a time, while the authorities try to figure out what to do with the kids. And it's awful. It's just awful. It can do lasting, lifelong damage, the severing of the attachment between parent and child. And worse, as we heard, Canada is complicit because we bless it. We say, the United States is a safe country and what they do is fine. Well, okay, so we should do something about that, right? We should write our MP. We should send money to border organizations. We should visit this crèche. We should pray. But then I'm just back to nagging. Be like Jesus, forgive like Jesus, turn the other cheek like Jesus, teach like Jesus, feed the hungry like Jesus, stand up to the authorities like Jesus did, visit the prisoners, treat women with dignity. Come on, be like Jesus, be like Jesus. I actually find this struggle not to nag very frustrating. It lives with me, it really irritates me as I consider what to preach and what to bring to you. I have lain awake at night wondering how to untie this knot, how to preach without nagging for a few more years. And it's with these thoughts bothering me that I came to today's scripture passage. And I noticed there's no nagging in this passage. And there's no doctrine either, at least not in your face doctrine. There is social justice, but not as a complaint or a demand. What we have in this scriptural prophecy from Isaiah is actually a dream. Isaiah's dream for how the world might one day be. Well, how everything might one day be. One day, says Isaiah, one day, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. And then we Christians think of that shoot coming from the line of David. Jesse was David's father. We think of that as Jesus. Well, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, and he will not judge by what his eyes see. And he will decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and a little child will lead them, the wolf and the bear and the lion. One day, it's coming. It's coming. It's a beautiful dream. It's an amazing dream. A world at peace where the children are safe. A Christmas world where we've created ecological harmony. The poor are nourished. Children are safe with their parents. It's a dream that inspires us, a dream that encourages us to stay the course, a dream that enlivens us. Sometimes what we need to hear is the dream. Like, of course, the most famous sermon, I think, that was ever preached, Martin Luther King's dream, based on Isaiah. Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the hatred of injustice, one day it will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. And then Martin Luther King concludes the sermon by quoting Isaiah. He says, I have a dream that one day every valley will be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places shall be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. A dream. He preached the dream. And I have dreams too. I think we all do. A dream that one day there will be clean water and good schools on every First Nation reservation. We dream that one day Canada's north will stop melting and that the climate will be just right. We dream that one day our prisons won't be populated mostly with visible minorities and that handguns will be a thing of the past. We have a dream where out of the cold isn't necessary anymore because everyone is fed and warm. A dream that governments will work for the least and the last. A dream that we can and will stand up to the United States of America and demand that children go home safe with their moms and dads. Maybe over the next few years I should preach the dream nothing but the dream. George Bernard Shaw once said, "You see things and you say, 'Why?' But I dream things that never were and say, 'Why not?'" We should dream more. Because what gets our blood boiling without recrimination, what gets our feet moving without nagging, what lights a fire in our hearts and minds without the guilt is our dream, a dream that inspired Martin Luther King, a dream that inspired Jesus Christ himself to face down violent, evil empires, even at the cost of their lives. The dream of a world where really people do try to love one another, where all things are made new, where we get to be, according to the Apostle Paul, we get to be ambassadors. That is, imagine that. There are only 300 ambassadors in all of Canada, 300. But Paul says we all get to be ambassadors of reconciliation. What a dream. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, says Prospero, as he and the cast of characters in The Tempest leave stage. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. But I would put it the other way around. I would counter and say that dreams are such stuff as makes us. Which means in the end, well, at least this morning, I will promise to try to nag less, and I will encourage you to dream more. Amen.